Welcome back, not Professor, Dr. Alan Zundel. Thank you for coming back on.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
yeah, today we're going to be talking about the Economic Rights Party, what it is, and just have a meaningful conversation about it. So,
Okay.
what is it?
Well, first of all, it's an idea.
Okay,
Okay. It has existence as a few people in different states, including you, I think, who have at least found something in the vision appealing and are speaking to some extent with each other or showing some kind of support for the concept until we see if it can get off the ground. It comes out of my experience, especially with the Green Party in the United States. I both was active in the Green Party in California and played roles at the state level and ran for office as a Green Party candidate. And I did research on the Green Party and wrote a book about it, which you can find on Amazon if you're interested. The I forget the title of it, something about the Green Party in the United States. I think the origins of the Green Party in the United States. It has my name as the author.
okay.
So, out of that experience and out of that study, I decided some things that don't work well for minor parties and created a vision in conjunction with somebody else in the Green Party who was trying to reform the party. And we failed in that attempt to reform the state party in Oregon of how it could better operate. So, the vision comes from that experience mostly, and it is formed around two concepts that I think are especially important, having to do with economic rights, thus, at least the tentative name as the Economic Rights Party.
Can you go over those sort of foundational principles that are laid out currently?
Yeah, it's important to me to take a stand on the organization of the economy. Just like the Republicans are known for their particular positions, and the Democrats are sort of known for positions they've been fighting about those for quite a few decades now. But the idea is both of those parties are supporters of capitalism, but they have different ideas about how to best make it work better. My position is that it's never going to work really well. And so we need to formulate a vision that goes beyond capitalism and is also not the type of socialism that people are generally familiar with. This is more of a vision of what I would call libertarian socialism, which means minimal government, but workplaces controlled by the people who work in them rather than the people who put money into them, and finding ways that every resident of a country, every legal resident, can have enough to live a decent life, no matter what their status is in terms of employment or disability or need or anything like that. So that is the underlying ethical foundation, is that people who work in businesses should be the ones who make the decisions about those businesses. And every citizen has a right to some level of access to resources, enabling them to live a decent life in the standards of that society, or else nobody has a right to any private property.
Would you say it's explicitly like anti-capitalist, or would you use softer language?
Anti-capitalist makes it sound, I would like to say more what I'm for than what I'm against. All
Sure.
right. But I would say it's anti-capitalist. And I defined capitalism not the way most people do, because they don't look at how power is structured in a capitalist economy. They assume it's about private property and free markets. Well, it's not that's not the essential part of capitalism. The essential part is people who have control of financial resources are the ones who are able to control the economy through their control of things like corporations. So it's a power dynamic. The very few who own large proportions of the capital in the country and also have access to credit, easy access to credit, largely because they own capital, are the ones who really control the economy, and they do it in the interest of increasing their wealth. That's the way the system is structured. So that is something I am against. And I would say, in that sense, it's anti capitalism, not necessarily against people owning property or having markets as a way of exchanging goods and services. But yeah, putting workers in charge of businesses rather than investors.
Sure. So even though I agree largely with this framework and this idea, I want to like push a little bit so that
Sure.
I can maybe give the viewer more of an understanding how this would function. And
Hmm.
the two main objectives or the objections that I can think of is for one, people get scared of like Marxism as being the other extreme. You know, you have capitalism gone awry that leads to like oligarchy and stuff, and then you have Marxism, and that would be state centralized power owning the means of production. So you talk about workers owning the means of production. So can you maybe like more clearly spell out how where this diverges from Marxism, like how it's different more explicitly?
Mm. Well, Marxism has a lot of different varieties of thoughts in it,
Sure.
right? Marx wrote a lot, and we have his writings over a period of time in which he did change his mind about different things. But there were two streams of socialism. The one that preceded him was more what I call libertarian socialism, or it's also called anarchist socialism, although that gives the false impression that there should be no way of organizing society. Just anarchy to most people means chaos, everybody do their own thing. That's not what it has traditionally meant. In fact, the word libertarian was originally coined by an anarchist well before it was picked up for use in modern times by the Libertarian Party. Um, Marxism, his strategy, aside from all the things I disagree with Marx about, I do think he had ideas that were important in his time in advancing the conversation about political economy. But the main thing, his strategy was in countries, well, in his time, not all countries were democracies, far from it. Most had an elite group in charge, people, landowners, and people who own businesses, things like that, like Germany and France. So it was not very democratic, but he thought that either you could, through revolution, take control of an anti-democratic government, or in those countries that were relatively democratic, like Great Britain and the United States, you could work to form a political party in order to take power within the government and then use that to control businesses in the name of the workers. Now,
Mhm.
this is the part that always tripped up libertarian socialism. Somebody is doing this in the name of somebody else. So you have a principal agent problem. How can you keep those folks from acting in your interest rather than in their own interests? So the big divergence here would be insofar as gaining political power, which would not be the only goal, that power would be used to empower the workers in their own businesses and not control the businesses in the name of the workers. So they would directly control those businesses and then set about the business of unraveling a lot of the powers of the government that it now has. Because as we see, so much power has devolved into the hands of the presidency because the way our constitutional system makes it very difficult for the US government to address problems, that power can be abused
Mhm.
in ways that people fear from Marxism. Essentially, that's what we have going on now. In essence, the kind of fascism we see coming from the government is the same kind of flaws as the kind of Marxism that people fear.
Okay, and then the other, and you touched on this just a little bit, is I think the other main objection to this sort of idea would be organization. Like we understand pretty clearly when we look at our current society how things are organized, and it's, you know, it doesn't work out for the 99% so well, but it is organized in that way. Like, how do you actually organize a society around these principles? Like, there must be someone that allocates the resources, even if the workers own the means of production, or you know, however you want to put that. There's still someone that's saying, okay, so now this percentage of the funds, or however that works out for each, you know, specific section of the country or whatever. Like, how do we get the funds from these companies that are worker owned to, because essentially you're talking about like a universal basic income, right?
Mhm.
Essentially what it boils down to.
Part of the picture, yeah.
Well, that's part of the picture. That's one of the like central ideas. So what is the organizing principle? How is it organized in such a way without like an oppressive state that is Marxism adjacent? But how do
Okay.
you organize it? I don't know if I'm making that question very
Yes,
clear.
I think I understood your question. First, I want to clarify when you say worker owned, to me, it's important to say worker controlled
Okay.
because I don't think businesses can be owned. Businesses are composed of human beings doing work.
Okay, fair
And
enough.
we're not supposed to be able to own human beings, which is the problem with our
Right.
corporations today. Somebody owns the business, but that business is composed of people.
Yeah.
So, first off, you would have a progressive system of taxation, and then everybody gets money allocated to their account, much like we saw during COVID times. Remember the stimulus checks?
Yes.
And when you have a government whose main role is to collect taxes and to distribute money, it can function very efficiently with very little bureaucracy. We know that from Social Security. The Social Security program for older people is very efficient at bringing in money and sending out money. Doesn't take a lot of people to do that. The part that's the most uh, requires the most bureaucracy is the part that deals with people who get Social Security when they haven't worked enough to gain a Social Security income or are not at that age. So people who are disabled, for example, or seniors who don't have who haven't accrued enough Social Security credits to get an income, those folks have to go through a process of vetting and all the rest. But with the universal basic income, you don't have to do that. You don't have to decide who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. Everyone gets the same amount across the board. Very simple.
So another objection I can see coming then is what is people's motivation then to work? So if you have uh, workers managing and controlling various businesses, if everyone is getting a consistent check, what is the motivating principle that's getting people to actually go work? And how do you compel people to do that without slipping into the to authoritarianism? Because I can see that going a certain direction, and that's the great fear that I hear in response to these models.
Okay. Two things. One thing which is probably less convincing to people, but I still think is true. And the other thing which is maybe more convincing. The first thing is human nature. People want to do creative things. They want to build, they want to uh, make better things. It's that creative impulse. And everybody, like I'm retired, I don't have to work. I have sufficient income right now. But I was an academic. I still do a lot of research and study, and then I promote the ideas that I've come up with. So I'm still doing academic work, but I'm doing it with a lot more freedom.
Right.
Um, Other people enjoy tinkering with cars. Other people enjoy the process of making new inventions. So there's all kinds of incentives just out of human nature to help create a better society, to do things creatively, to use your time well, to feel like you contributed to society. I think those are part of who we are. And the only reason that we become used to the idea that work is onerous is largely because we're forced to do it by economic pressures. And then we're doing it under the control of other people who are not running the business in our interests. So, under those conditions, who wants to work? I don't want to work for somebody else who tells me how to do my job and then benefits from my labor more than I do. And I don't want to have to work simply because I'm going to starve if I don't. That feels very coercive. So that's my main answer. The other answer is that market forces will take care of that. If too many people are sitting home, the people who do want to work are going to find themselves much better compensated. Okay, so you're sitting home on your decent basic income. Meanwhile, somebody else is making a lot more money, and you think, you know, I could improve my situation, my family situation, if I simply went out there and did some work. You
Okay.
know, so it's
So
that self-interested motive.
okay, so then that's okay, so that's the area. So it wouldn't be that everyone would be making the exact same. There would be like a basic threshold floor level. Everyone makes a certain amount, and this is like a subsistence wage,
Right.
right? Like the basics you need to survive within
It's a
society.
floor.
It's a
That-
floor.
I
And
wouldn't say
then
I wouldn't say the basics you need to survive. That sounds a little too severe. I'd say to lead a decent life within the standards of your society.
Okay. So you have that for everyone. And then above that, people that put in the work and go and get specialized and work in whatever field, they can make more than that. And so that base level pay that you would get isn't influenced by what you do, but you can surpass that
Right,
within this model.
right.
Okay. And then so would the government tax the businesses just the same as they do now at like a basic rate? Like
Well,
how
that depends. All those kind of decisions are not essential to the model. How you tax things, whether it's your property taxes, inheritance taxes, business taxes, personal income taxes, all that doesn't, it matters, but it's not essential to this model. What I would suggest is to make it as simple as possible, a progressive income tax with get rid of all the exclusions and the deductions and all the exemptions, all that kind of stuff, and just each individual pays an income tax. If your income is above a certain threshold, you pay a higher rate, right? Progressive taxation, so that if somebody has a lot, they're taxed more.
so this model would it allow for billionaires to even exist, or would it just kind of phase them out
I think it would phase them out.
due to like the very nature of the system?
Yeah, because the way they become billionaires is through things like selling shares in new companies, you
Uh-huh.
know, public offering like Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX, because he owns that company, owns, and then he sells the stock, he makes a fortune. Well, if you can't own the company, if whatever share of interest you have in it as an investor is simply like a bond. You don't get to make decisions for the company. They're just guaranteeing you a certain rate of return, interest and principal on the money you put up with them. Then you don't have a way to gain all this exorbitant amount of income by your position of power within the economy. So if you have things like inheritance taxes and income taxes, billionaires are going to be slowly phased out or quickly, depending on how fast it goes. It'll be harder to coin new billionaires. And those who are now billionaires would find that their income is slowly uh, deteriorating.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So something that I hear from Mark, not every Marxist maybe, but I hear quite often is that democracy itself is kind of like a fabrication or something that the bourgeoisie sort of that within itself. And so the reason why they're so revolutionary is they think that democracy itself is like a byproduct, maybe. So, but this is like very democratic at the end of the day. So even though it's not capitalist, and in some ways it may be anti-capitalist, it's still deeply democratic. But then there's some people that would push back from the left, because right now I've talked about mainly people probably from more further right, some of the pushbacks they would have about fears of the way this could go. But from the left, like you would probably get pushback. Um, isn't this just another form of capitalism, but just capitalism with some pretty extreme limits?
I'd say, well, it's hard to answer generic Marxists without knowing the specifics of their argument. But insofar as I've heard critiques of democracy, it usually means the kind of liberal capitalist democracy we have. Democracy in the United States, people do not have that much influence over the government. You get the right to vote, but you only get two parties that can win,
Yeah.
right? And neither of those parties is too interested in what you have to say once they get into office. So we don't have a real democracy. We have a democracy in name with a limited degree of influence by the general public, but mostly it's run in the interest of that most wealthy segment of the citizenry. So, in that sense, it's a fake democracy. It's like a Potemkin village that is a facade of democracy, but it still has elements of democracy in it that you can build on. And this is what a Marxist would say too. We got to not be seduced by the idea that simply voting and forming parties and the rest is going to do it without some kind of radical changes as well, because capitalists are going to push back. They're going to dig in their heels and they're going to resort to violence to make sure that this doesn't happen. But I'd say in a sense of my commitment to nonviolent action. Number one, you exploit whatever openings for democratic reform there are in the system. And I think you need to start there with changing electoral laws to make it a more fair voting system. And number two, whatever it is I was going to say, I forgot. What was I talking about? Democracy. Number two, once you have a system in which to organize a business, you have to give power to the people working in it. You're going to find that a lot of what government does is no longer necessary. Okay, because what it does now is been built up, especially during the New Deal era, to do things like regulate business and redistribute income and guarantee that people are getting an income, are deserving of it, all that kind of bureaucracy. But now it's shifted more towards supporting the billionaire class with subsidies, with guarantees, with loans to keep them into power. So I'd say once you've transitioned or you're starting to transition into this worker controlled type of business organizations, then government becomes less and less necessary. And you don't have to worry about democracy in the sense of who's in the government. That can be simple. You elect some people to make sure the thing runs. You have a constitutional system. But most of the decisions in life are going to be made within those businesses. How is the income going to be allocated among workers? What are we going to do with the surplus? Those kind of decisions would be in the hands of ordinary people. So, in that sense, people have control of the society without having to channel it through government institutions.
Right. And that makes sense. That so essentially you would have a state that, like by necessity, just because the system doesn't need such a large state, it kind of it shrinks like pretty substantially as the
Yes.
new system would be put into effect. Um, how do you safeguard the businesses specifically from becoming authoritarian? Because if everything's done democratically, there still has to be like leadership within the business, I would assume. These various businesses would have to elect leaders to represent them. These would be like maybe union-like, but more extreme, I'm guessing. Uh, and there was issues with unions, even though I'm largely pro-union. There were issues with unions and the leadership within unions being authoritarian in their own way and having their own ends and power abuse and all those things. So, like, what are some safeguards from making sure that doesn't happen? Because that would necessitate to safeguard, I would think, a state to kind of
Okay.
oversee the business.
To some extent, but also when you form a business, they would have a constitution outlining rights of the workers against their own corporate board, right? Their board of directors, whoever they elect. So you just like in the United States Constitution for citizens, there'd be certain guaranteed rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association. And then you got competition. You don't like the way your business is run? Go find one where they run it better. You know? And once again, I'm blanking and trying to keep several thoughts in mind at the same time. But let me see, think back to the idea here is how to keep them from becoming authoritarian. Oh, yes. The way they become authoritarian today is because the the head of the union starts collaborating with the business owners, right? And they work together to keep the workers oppressed and give a reward to the people in those positions, like the heads of the unions that are playing ball with them, refusing to strike, and they allow them um, to maintain that power to exploit the workers because it benefits both sides. If you don't have that, who are you going to have on your side as a corrupt leader of the business? The workers are going to vote you out, or if you make it impossible for them to do that, they'll just everybody leaves that business, starts their own business.
Mhm. So this vision is actually, I mean, it's probably more, I would say it like puts more of a focus on markets, but just in a very different way from capitalism, right? Because you're wanting to outsource most of what we produce as a society, and most of the goods, right, is worker control or worker, yeah, controlled businesses. So would that be for every facet of society? would be these models. So like I think of like hospitals. So are we talking about medical infrastructure? Are we talking about like actual infrastructure like the electrical grid, the all these various pieces of society? Would the state itself own or oversee any of
There,
this? Or would
yeah,
every single facet be
that could be democratically decided through the government, but my ideal would be some necessary things. Like in economic theory, there are certain public goods that are more efficient if they're run by a central authority rather than distributed in a market of competitors, like ownership of the electrical grid or a water system in a city, things like that. But even those, they're often managed by outside companies rather than the government itself.
Mhm.
So in that sense, you could have a contract between the workers who are running the infrastructure and the government that outlines certain rights and responsibilities. I would think any worker in any kind of business, even if it's running a water infrastructure, would have a better idea of how to run it well than people in the government. But
right?
there's right putting up the financing and then making sure that it is run in the public interest. There would be a role for that. Um, Hospitals, I think you could have that worker owned. I don't think that's necessarily a public good. Insurance companies, they could be owned, they could be controlled by workers. Um, Schools could be controlled by the educational staff and the rest of the staff. So most areas, I think that even now are in the hands of the government could be run by worker-controlled businesses, but there would be areas where you'd want to have the government more involved because it's you just can't have companies competing to build, the same water infrastructure in the same city.
Sure. I guess so. Like, how do you maintain within that system quality if these are businesses, even if they're worker owned? Like, would you get vastly different outcomes? And I'm just using medical as an example. Say you have a hospital here that it's worker owned, and then a hospital here that's worker owned. How do you maintain a standard of like medical practice across the board? Would that be something that the state would have to impose? Um,
Probably, these are all details that could be worked out. They're not essential to the main elements of the vision, but I would think there would still be licensing and professionals. And so if you have a staff of medical professionals, they're going to be concerned about standards. I don't think people are purely financially motivated, except in our current system. A lot of people go into the medical field as doctors, for example, because they want to make money, not because they want to be good doctors. In this model, I would hope you'd have more people who go into it because they want to be good medical practitioners and they want to set standards for their profession, and they're willing to abide with that and to discipline and sanction those who don't abide by those standards. That's one side of it. Another side is competition. As we as the public, which hospital am I going to, affiliate with when I need to go to get a primary care doctor or see a specialist? The one that has the best reputation for giving good quality care, I would think.
yeah, no, that makes sense. So would you be in favor of, as like a stepping stone, at least something like Medicare for all, or do you think that that would be largely inefficient? And it's connected to this, but like something like that is called on by myself included, and a lot of people on the left is starting with things like that. But these are all social programs. These are all government programs, and even if they may contract out and outsource, it's still organized by the state.
Right.
Um, do you support those in general? And then how would that fit into the system?
I support it as a second best choice,
Okay.
right? Because the kind of vision I'm laying out, there's no organization that I know of that is promoting that. You see it talked about among socialists, but they haven't really organized around that for various reasons that I could go into, but that would probably bore the audience more than you'd want to. Uh, I think you need to give people concrete benefits in order for them to believe in a program. And probably would be easier to get to something like Medicare for all in the short run than it would be to get the whole insurance industry controlled by the people who work in it.
Yeah, that's So like some of these things I think would be like a stepping stone.
Right. I would see it as that. I'd
So,
say cooperating with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to the extent that you need to until you can build up enough of a organization, get enough people on board to move things in a different direction.
so within the system, would small businesses, how would those kind of entities function? And I'm talking about like really small, like your small shops, your restaurants, because a fear within, once again, I'm using like the most extreme examples, Marxism, is that you kind of lose the heart and soul of everything when it's just state run. You don't have those specific mom and pop shops and the specific
Mhm.
restaurant that all becomes, the sort of like state slop, all across the board. Right now we have corporate slop all across the board, but you know, um, so how would very small businesses be managed? Ones that can't scale up to, hundreds of working members and whatnot. Like how
Mhm.
would you handle those smaller businesses?
Right now, governments make a distinction between small businesses and larger businesses, and they regulate larger businesses, at least in theory, more stringently, right? I
Supposedly.
think supposedly. So I would do the same kind of thing. When you reach a certain size as a business in terms of maybe number of employees or amount of revenue or capitalization, some kind of measures of size, once it reaches a certain size, it's got to be turned over to the working people. Before that, I think a small business is really the owner is really a worker as well, and probably the worker who does the most work and getting it organized, helping train other people to do it, envisioning what kind of markets they're going to reach or what kind of product they're going to produce. So you have a single person doing a lot of the work that's just getting this up and running. And I think they should have enough control to do that well. And once it gets to be large enough that, say, a small business owner would consider selling it off because it's a little too big now, and they have to change the way the business is organized. It's a difficult transition in the current system, but same thing, you would transition to, rather than a publicly owned or publicly traded stock corporation, you would transition to a worker controlled organization. You start out a small business. If it gets big enough, then it's a matter of turning it over to your workers and receiving some kind of a compensation in return.
That makes sense because that's one of the fears from people that are like more entrepreneurial in nature is that, I don't want to work hard and do all these things and then immediately share everything with, and some people don't even say that in a like a selfish way, but and having been a small business owner myself, I can sympathize with that a little bit more. Is you pull some crazy hours owning a small business just to get up off the ground, and then if you have a system where the workers instantly own everything coming at the door like an equal percentage, that just doesn't seem tenable. But what you're talking about is it's I think that would work a
Okay.
lot better.
I think it'd be good to talk about the organization of the party as well as the organization of the economy, because I think it should reflect the same kind of principles. In here, part of what I'm envisioning is that rather than having chapters that people vote and then elect a board and then they determine what that chapter is going to do, you would have entrepreneurs essentially who organize as part of the party around things that they're most interested in, like either geographically organized or organized around a policy they'd like to see the party adopt, or whatever it happens to be, because there's going to be people who are more politically motivated to do that kind of organizational work. And I think they should just compete with each other. So think of it in this terms. Say you have a state party, that party, rather than being controlled by chapters that are geographically based, anybody in that state party could start to organize a chapter around anything they want. Like, for example, you want to organize around environmental protection. So, this is a chapter of the Economic Rights Party. They all agree to the basic principles, but they also want to promote more environmental protection. So, they organize around that. So, I think you need entrepreneurs to keep things running, and then they either draw people into their chapter or they don't. They lose them to others. And depending on how those chapters thrive or not, they're going to have more influence in the state party or not. So it's kind of a competitive entrepreneurial system as well, in which you don't vote people into the state office and they give the orders down to the rest of the chapters of what we're going to do, what our priorities are. You allow that to emerge from the competition between ideas and people who are trying to get other people on board with them.
This is all well and good. I like the vision. I agree with the vision. But like, what are the first steps for something like this? Because historically, having a background in the Green Party, you know better than I do that the current system, the Democrats and the Republicans alike, do everything they can to quash anything. And so, you have a lot of like the left-leaning Democrats that are the progressives that they kind of work within the Democratic coalition, but they only do that so they can get on the ballots. A lot of these people that are emerging right now. So like, what are some practical things, some practical paths forward to establishing and organizing something like this?
I think the worst way to do it is to try to become a mass-based party right off the bat in order to get a lot of people registered with your party so you can get on the ballot and run candidates, because those candidates are never going to win under the current electoral system. It's just a monumental waste of time, energy, and money for all these little parties to try to maintain ballot access when they're never going to win, given the way the system is structured. So I think you start off with a smaller select group who share that vision and can build a culture around it. And then you start bringing in more and more people, because people will adapt to the culture of the organization. They're either going to find it appealing or not. But you have to have that established first rather than just letting anybody in. You have to make sure the people that you're letting in are people that, at least to some degree, see eye to eye with what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
Once you can get that going, then you can get off the ground. Now, that's a difficult step because it means finding people that are open to an alternative vision and talking to them long enough to make that vision clear to them, and also hearing their feedback and getting their ideas about how to improve on it. So I've
Yeah.
been cautious about getting this off the ground. Not that I have any choice, because people are not just going to flock to a new party idea. They may be curious, but they're also very skeptical. So I've been trying to gradually find people that I think would be interested in this kind of vision, or identify what kind of groups I'm trying to target as potential recruits. And with that, start small chapters in various places that can, build from there, establish a culture of the party, establish a common vision, and then make it more mass-based once you've got that kind of firmly established. So right now, the party is composed, besides you and I, of a few people who trust me and agree with the vision, but are not highly active. So they're the kind of people that I think they would help create a culture and maintain a culture, if not themselves trying to build up chapters.
So yeah, because that seems to be the difficult part is the organization itself and
Yeah, finding people.
finding people, organizing with those people. And it's difficult with all the pressures, economic pressures, and just life pressures that people
Sure.
have right now to vote a lot of time to something like this of getting it up off the ground. So, what are some practical steps for someone like me? Because I'm you know, I'm a relatively busy guy, but I'm pretty young and I can kind of burn the candle at both ends. And I would like to organize more. So what are some practical ways to kind of spread the word to start bringing those people into orbit?
Mhm. First of all, happy Father's Day, belatedly,
Thank you.
because you are a new father,
Yes.
and I know that adds to those pressures you were just talking about. So I
Uh,
appreciate that you're putting time into stuff like this. I really do understand how difficult that is to hold down a job and raise a family and try to be politically active. I've been through that. I've been there,
yeah.
and I acknowledge how difficult it is. I would say you are doing something. You're promoting it through this video, for one thing. And that's what I was doing with my channel before I closed the channel down, is promoting the idea, seeing who shows up, if anybody, and then trying to get a conversation going. So that's one step. If there's people within your orbit that you think might be interested, you could bring the subject up in one way or another and talk about it. Talk about political philosophies or the frustrations with the system, and then just introduce the ideas and see how interested they become. If there's nobody in your orbit, then it really is a matter of waiting until the party in other places get more off the ground, and then you can point to something saying, look, this is what they did there. I want to tell you about what's going on, say, in California with the Economic Rights Party, to show that it's kind of something that actually is a going concern rather than just an idea. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of people I want to try to target for this. Uh, of course, socialists traditionally target working people, but that's a huge number of people, and they don't always have a lot in common.
Right.
Especially they're not uh, enculturated or educated in socialism enough to want that as their goal. Becoming a little more like that now. People are becoming more familiar and less scared of the label socialist. But I've been thinking really along the lines of more spiritually oriented people who have, they're not dogmatic and they're not from fundamentalists. They're from the right wing side of Christianity. But there's a lot of folks who are more progressive or questioning politics as it's practiced now out of a spiritual orientation. I've met a lot of folks like that. And it's not just Christian. You got progressive Christians, you got Buddhists who want to be more engaged. You got people like yourself who are more secular, but have a religious background and still have some of the values of that, like community and solidarity and justice and doing good for other people. So finding people that are really motivated for morality and have a concern about the direction of the country. And I think that's the kind of people you look for. Where you can find them really depends on your situation, whether it's going to be in a religious institution or it's going to be somewhere else, and depends on the kind of connections you have and where you have an opportunity to talk to people or an entree of some kind. So it's something that, depending on your situation, each individual that wants to help build this would have to look around and try to feel their way towards talking to other people who might have a receptivity toward it.
Yeah. Being in Texas, I guess I've been exposed to less of those religious or spiritual kind of people that have that kind of bent to the way they operate. A lot of the religious people in my sphere are very much like that more fundamentalist right wing sort of religious. But something, and this is, I guess, me being like trying to think about it pragmatically about, I mean, a lot of people, they're so sort of crushed by the economic system we're, they're facing right now and everything that I don't think a lot of people have the bandwidth to even consider some of these alternative systems because they're just so focused on the necessities or the lack thereof. And so something I've thought about a decent organizing principle, I just want to get your feedback on this, is actually trying to start a business that operates from a model like this to bring people in that way. And
Mhm.
me having my background in the food service industry, I think that that could be a way to, especially my state, since there's not a lot of, left-wing people or a lot of progressives or a lot, there's not a lot of that out here. But a lot of people, I think they might be more willing to believe in something like this if they saw it in operation and were able to actually partake in it. And that's part of that, like, that community building side of things is if you see something in operation, that's completely different. And if you experience it, that's completely different than if you're just talking about it and you understand it as a concept. What do you think
Mhm.
about that?
If it's true. Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. The difficulty with starting worker controlled businesses is, of course, capitalization. That's the hard part. But there's other types of organizations similar to that, like um, retail food cooperatives. But yeah, that's a good idea. If you could figure out ways to capitalize these businesses, I guess what I was going to say is people that have experience doing all kinds of things that require people to work together cooperatively, mutual aid things, soup kitchens, food distribution programs, all that kind of stuff. When people have the experience of doing that, it gives them more confidence that people can work together. And it also gives them more faith that other people have good intentions.
Yeah.
When they see other people coming together with the same intention of doing good things and they're able to work together, that's quite a life transforming experience.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly kind of because I want to get into that more. Again, given my background, I think that I could operate fairly well in that more like the food mutual aid kind of side of things and build a community around that. And then if people start to see that it's working, I think that's an avenue for building such a community.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you could look around in your area, larger area probably, see if there's any worker co-ops already or any organizations that promote their interests. Because there, in most states, there are already worker cooperatives of some kind or another. See what the laws are like in your state around organizing cooperatives. Are they making it really difficult? Is there cooperatives that would be willing to work together towards changing laws in your state? There's a lot of options there beyond just starting your own business, which, is a good idea, but it's hard to get off the ground. Maybe for you, a little easier because you've already done it. But if you could find people already active in some type of cooperative institution, they may be a starting point towards saying, how can we make it easier for people to engage in these things in our state? And use that as a kind of political starting point for conversations.
yeah, I've had some of those very same thoughts. And you're talking about the spiritual side of the religious side. I mean, small churches tend to be great community hubs already. And so, kind of coordinating with groups like that to do something like mutual aid is probably for
Mhm.
someone like me in Texas the best bet. A
Yeah.
worker, cooperative or but even like spiritual, faith-based
Yeah. Just
houses of worship.
be find a church that's more compatible with your values
Yeah,
rather than one that's going to use their shelter program to evangelize. You want to have one that's going to work in a way that you feel like you could fit in and make it clear. I don't belong to your religion, but I'd like to help out and learn more about your program. That'd probably be a opening. And I think the more liberal Protestant type churches would be better bets than the more evangelical conservative type churches.
no, it would. And I'm talking about all these things because I know you've thought about them and I've thought about these things a lot. But to anyone watching, it's easy to get like it's easy because I found myself even kind of despairing sometimes about you want to do something, you want to get it right, but what do you do? And it's easy to feel powerless as an individual within this system and feel like, we know that our votes, even though they can be powerful, a lot of times they're nothing compared to the big money donors and everything like that. And so um like what can we actually do is
Hmm.
an important question. It's important to talk about so that people feel empowered to that if we collectively, even if we're doing a little bit collectively, that can start snowballing into bigger things and to bigger organizing or organizing at a larger scale. And
Hmm.
so um trying to be optimistic about it even in the face of what's kind of a daunting task if
Oh,
you
yeah.
think about it.
But it's a daunting task to try to survive and not change things because it's just going to get worse. So I think people have the motivation, whether they have the time and resources, energy, all that to contribute. If you can get something off the ground, then you can bring people in who all you're asking is their vote, right? And that's not asking a lot. Just to have somebody else to vote for would be a great opportunity. And to have an organization that can recommend, like, hey, you may not know it, but in your district, there's a guy running on a platform of a universal basic income. Let's try to give him some support. Your votes, or maybe the rest of us give a little contribution. So you could find ways to do that. I'd say education is a good piece, a big piece, self-education, learning more about this kind of thing. And this video is a good example of something two of us can do to try to bring the idea more out there in the public eye and, maybe spark some thinking on the part of other people, spark some, not thinking so much as inspiration or hopefulness.
Yeah.
It's really important to me because I've spent a lot of my life in protest movements. It's really important to me to do something positive rather than just do something you're against. Because it seems like a lot of the protest movements get co-opted by the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party gets co-opted by so-called centrist, pro-capitalist types. So I could go out there on a No Kings rally and say, I hate everything Donald Trump is doing, but what's the alternative to Donald Trump? If it's just voting for a Democrat who's going to have very similar, you know, different, maybe not as bad as Trump, but still lead us in the wrong direction, it's not a positive direction for me. So I don't want to just say what I'm against. I want to say these are the kind of things I'm for, and this is what I'm willing to put my time and energy into.
Yeah. And I think that's important to talk about the culture. I think that's an important aspect to this to keep in mind is something I've noticed is that, especially amongst more progressive or left-leaning groups, be it the Green Party or even like the DSA, a lot of times it becomes what we're against. And then it seems like people on the left, just generally speaking, are much more willing to tear one another apart over
Yeah,
small differences. And
yeah.
so, I mean, there does have to be like, I guess, an Overton window to an extent, but I think sometimes we don't organize properly, especially like the right does, especially right now. That I mean, the right recently there's been a little bit more pushback from certain voices on the right with what Trump's doing, but I mean, for years now they've been lockstep with one another, and they disagree on a whole lot, but they've been lockstep. And if we can organize in such a way that we're going to have differences of opinion, we're not going to agree on every single policy across the board. But if we can organize around some basic principles,
Mm.
not tear one another apart in the
I
process.
got things to say about that.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, for one thing, the right wing has obviously more resources, so that it's better able to promote its vision and start organizations and the rest of that. But also they present this in moral language, freedom, um, you know, equality. They use that kind of language. Leftists, not talking about the Democratic Party, they also use a lot of false rhetoric. But leftists, because of Marxism, I think essentially had this idea that you could base a movement on workers' self-interest and gaining power. The people who are attracted to that tend to be people who are not ethically motivated as much as they are motivated by this is in the best interest of me and people like me, and we need to gain power to do it. So you get people who are very interested in domination. You know, that's the inclination. Whether they say it or not, that's what I see in people. And it may be unfair, but I see that desire to um, control and dominate. So organizing this around an ethical vision is a way of saying we want people who are motivated by ethics and how they treat other people and what they're concerned about. And it's not all about self-interest. That's an area of Marxism that I think he was wrong about as well. I kind of made it very simplistic, but I think he was going in the wrong direction in some ways.
No, I agree. I think that is kind of sunk into the culture on a lot of kind of the left in general. Obviously, not everyone. Obviously, that's not every progressive. Yeah,
Well, I see that this is struggle in the DSA. It has a very long history, and it was founded by a guy who was much more ethically motivated. He actually had a background in the Catholic work movement, Michael Harrington, and was very active in left wing politics. And he wanted an organization that could push the Democrats leftward. Even though he was a Marxist, he was more of a what progressive, ethically based vision of it. He wasn't like a hardcore Marxist that you might think about. People try to pretend they're more radical than others. I'm sounding very disparaging. I have particular people in mind. I've seen them up close and personal. Um, I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I got to make that clear because I've been around a long time and I've seen a lot of people in organizations. Um, but I forgot what I was saying again. Can you help me out? Where was I going with that?
yeah. You were talking about the left, the
Ah,
starting out, the DSA starting out with more of an ethically based.
yeah. And
The
now
they got subsumed by more domination tactics, I guess, or however you want to put it.
yeah, in recent years, as they've become the left-wing organization in the United States, they've attracted a lot of frustrated Marxists who come in and they have a different cultural mindset
Yeah,
about what they're trying to achieve.
that's what I've noticed. And just this is just anecdotally, but I try to kind of get involved with my local DSA, and it was just, it was
It
just,
can be a battle.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was not
That's
much
what I want to avoid.
right. So, yeah, I guess in closing, what would you like to say to anybody that's watching about? I know we kind of talked about, how to move forward, how we can organize, but
Mhm.
what are some practical first steps?
Okay, so anyone that's interested in this can go to the website economicrightsparty.org. It is .org,
It's .org, yeah.
and sign up for the blog so that you can get periodic updates on what we're doing. And eventually, I'll be sending out like pieces of information to help people understand this vision a little better so that it would be a way for people to engage in self-education. Just you can ignore the emails if you want, or when you got time, you can scan things and learn a little bit more. So that would be a starting point. Beyond that, if you want to go further, contact me. Just write on my blog, say, hey, here, how do I get in touch? And we'll figure out a way to do that. And then we can have conversations and determine if this is a good fit for you or not.
And if you're in Texas, contact me because my information's on
Right.
the site. And
Yeah, Chris was asking for help there.
it's lonely out here in Texas, I gotta say.
Yeah, I feel for you.
But I appreciate you taking the time and letting me push you a little bit on some
No,
of the
you did a
thoughts.
good job.
Um, so even though I largely agree and I like the model, I could already think about a lot of the objections from the right and the left. So I just wanted to tackle some of those because
I think it was important to address those concerns.
so anyway, I do appreciate your time and
Well, I appreciate your time as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about it.
all right, until next time, I'll put all the links in the description of the video.